Hi everyone, thank you so much for attending our virtual town hall on the TA Strategic Plan. My name is Ryan McCauley from the San Mateo County Transportation Authority. I work in the Government and Community Affairs team. Before we get started, I just wanted to set a couple ground rules and logistics. As the presentation is being given, we have members of our team monitoring the chat window, so if you have any clarifying questions about the presentation, go ahead and enter them there and we'll have one of our team members respond as best they can. Please note that chat comments will not count as official public comments. If you want to make an official comment, please fill out our online form located on the project website, smcta.com/strategic plan. This website is linked in the video description below. You can also call our customer service at 1-800-660-4287. Or if you want to send a physical letter or written letter or comment, you can also send that to P.O. Box 3006, San Carlos, California 94070. All this information will be in the video description below. Just so you know, this video will archive itself on our YouTube channel, so if you were late or wanted to share this with anyone who couldn't tune in live, the link will be made available and shared out through all our social media channels. There's also a lot of information on our website, so if you have additional questions or are looking for more details, please visit smcta.com/strategic plan. Again, this is linked in the video description below. So again, thank you so much for joining us. Your feedback and participation is incredibly important to us. Without further ado, here's Project Manager Joel Slavitt, who will talk about the TA Strategic Plan.
Good afternoon. This is Joel Slavitt, and I'll be presenting information today in conjunction with my colleague Jessica Epstein on the draft TA Strategic Plan for the 2020 to 2024 timeframe. So first we'll start off with an introduction as to what the TA does and the strategic plan timeframe, then provide some background and context. Jessica will speak to the plan outreach, and I'll wrap up by sharing information regarding the proposed policy framework. So the TA is responsible for managing and administering sales tax revenue dedicated to transportation programs in San Mateo County. As part of this, the TA prepares plans and studies to shape policy and develop funding priorities, including strategic plans, every 5 years. We're currently in the process of finalizing the strategic plan for the time frame from 2020 through 2024. As you can see, the draft plan can be viewed at www.smcta.com/strategic plan. There's a 30-day comment period on the draft plan, and comments are due by November 15th. So this slide shows where we are in the plan development process. We've had many meetings with our stakeholder and technical advisory groups and have received a lot of great feedback. We've also had several meetings with our board ad hoc committee, completed the first phase of our public outreach, and are now in the second phase of outreach with the releasing of the draft plan. We're scheduled to bring the final draft plan for approval at the TA's December meeting. So now for some background and context. The purpose of the strategic plan is to provide the policy framework and guidance for determining how funding is allocated. This includes criteria for evaluating projects in our competitive program categories. We're preparing one strategic plan that will cover both Measure A and the portion of Measure W that the TA is tasked with administering. And this will all be done through a clear and transparent process. So this slide shows a little background between the different measures A and W. Both are half-cent sales taxes. Measure A was approved by the voters in 1988, and again, it was extended in 2004. Measure W was most recently passed by the voters in November of 2018. Measure A is a 25-year sales tax, which runs through December of 2033. Measure W is a 30-year sales tax, which runs through June of 2049. Measure A is entirely administered by the TA. Measure W is administered by both TA and Samtrans, with each agency administering a 50% share each. Measure A generates approximately $90 million a year. So does Measure W, but the TA is tasked with administering half of that, which is roughly $45 million per year. So now we see some pie charts, which basically provide an overview of the funding programs within each measure and the distribution of revenue to each individual category. As you can see, the TA provides funding to a variety of different transportation modes, including highways, railroad grade separations, bicycle and pedestrian to transit. The right side of the pie chart for Measure W shows the categories that the TA is responsible for administering. SamTrans is responsible for administering the County Public Transportation System category, which comprises half of the Measure W funding, and the TA is responsible for everything on the right side. So this slide shows the projected amount of remaining available funding through the life of Measure A and the amount of projected funding for the portion of Measure W that the TA is tasked with administering. As you can see, with the addition of Measure W, it brings in a substantial amount of additional revenue for transportation programs in San Mateo County. It's important to note, though, that the projected needs far outweigh projected revenue, and there's a need to leverage our local sales tax dollars with other sources of public and private revenue to be able to deliver projects. Now I'll turn this over to Jessica, who will talk about our public outreach.
Hi, everyone. My name is Jessica Epstein. I'm with the Government and Community Affairs team here. For the TA strategic plan, we did really a large amount of outreach in the community. And critical to this was our stakeholders and how that we engage them. Leading off was our TA board. Particularly, we had an ad hoc committee who met regularly throughout the process, really guiding the work we did. We also convened two committees of advisors who met regularly, a stakeholder advisory group and a technical advisory group. The stakeholder advisory group was made up of a variety of voices, from nonprofits to large and small employers, including those who provide social services and transit advocacy groups, and more. Our technical advisory group involved public works directors and city managers from all over the county, as well as transportation agency partners. Critical to all of this, of course, was the community input, and we did quite a bit of community input in this process to make sure we really heard about how the public felt about the development of the strategic plan and what the priorities were. So throughout our first large push of outreach, which was June to August of this year, we had an ongoing feedback loop with our SAG and TAG, as well as, of course, our board and ad hoc members. And the outreach really focused on Measure W. The reason for that is Measure A has been around for a while and has actually been through several rounds of outreach in previous strategic plans. But in Measure W is new, and it had some really critical questions to answer. Specifically, it had 11 core principles, which Joel will talk about later, but we were really tasked with figuring out how those core principles are weighted and what's the importance of them in the views of the public, as well as the SAG, TAG, and ad hoc. The weighting of the Measure W core principles was critical to our outreach. The survey was structured around that, and we really sought from the community how best to apply the Measure W core principles within the strategic plan and to the decisions that will be made around allocating funding. So we had our SAG and TAG fill out a survey. We had an online survey, which we put out in the public. A few different critical components is we have 4,000 engaged stakeholders who we reached out to and sent the survey to, school representatives, senior groups, community-based organizations. Those are the organizations that work within communities around the county. And of course, we leveraged our SAG and TAG networks. We also did a text blast to 40,000 residents asking them to take the survey. And we're pleased to say that we got 2,500 responses to our survey. We also held 14 community meetings, pop-ups, and presentations. And of course, we did a press release and quite a bit of social media around it. So you can see from here just a few different types of elements of our outreach, from farmers markets to community meetings to one of our SAG meetings there on the middle of the right. We're now in our second phase of outreach. This is the release of the plan right there at top, virtual town hall. If you're watching that, that's where we are. We also are getting additional input from the SAG and TAG and our board. We're going to be at the Board of Supervisors tomorrow, November 5th at 9 a.m. And we are sending out our plan once again to those 4,000 stakeholders, school and senior groups, community-based organizations, and leveraging the SAG and TAG network. We've put out a press release in social media, and I'd just like to remind everyone that all comments are being taken through the website, and the deadline is November 15th, 2019 at 5 p.m. So please be sure to get us your comments by that date. We really appreciate that. And with that, I will return it back to Joel.
Okay, so now we'll discuss important elements of the strategic plan policy framework. So we'll talk about how we compared the two measures, the TA's role in project delivery and technical assistance. We'll provide an overview of a few policy framework tables, discuss the weighting of the core principles, and the development of evaluation criteria. While we're not able to go through everything in this presentation, we encourage you to go to our website for more detail on all of the above. So one of the first things we did working with our key stakeholder groups was to determine which funding programs may be fairly comparable to each other. Making this determination is especially important if we are to consider one selection process for making funding awards for similar programs. This can make it more efficient for the TA to administer similar programs and less work for our sponsors or funding applicants to apply for funding. What we found is that there's a fair amount of comparability with the Measure A and W highway, grade separation, and pedestrian and bicycle programs, as well as the Measure A local streets and transportation and the Measure W local investment share of the local safety, pothole, and congestion relief program. It's important to note, however, though, that there are some differences that need to be respected among the similar programs. For example, pedestrian bicycle overcrossings are eligible in the Measure W highway program, while they're not eligible in the Measure A highway program. The Measure A and W transit programs aren't so similar. On the Measure A side, funding is apportioned by specific subcategories, and on the Measure W side, the intent is to fund inter-county trips from a wide variety of different competing transit modes that provide connections to the greater Bay Area. And then finally, there's no specific equivalent to the Measure A alternative congestion relief category on the Measure W side. Alternative congestion relief funding has historically gone to support the promotion of alternative transportation programs such as carpooling that Commute.org runs. We also looked at what the TA's role should be and how projects recommended for funding are implemented. With input from our key stakeholder groups, we're recommending that the TA should be proactive in identifying, sponsoring, and serving as a technical lead for highway projects of county-wide significance. We've heard from our local sponsors that they may not have the technical expertise or resources to deliver larger, more complex highway projects that often generate traffic well beyond their individual city boundaries. In addition, greater benefits may be realized targeting projects that reduce regional congestion, which can also improve local mobility. As part of this, the TA will consider setting aside funding for county-wide significant projects, striking a balance with local needs, which will be further addressed as part of future planning efforts to update the existing TA short-range highway plan and to prepare a new capital improvement program to get a better sense of the current and projected needs. So in regard to the TA's role in technical assistance, resources permitting, the TA will look to expand its role in helping to advance project delivery. We will do so by providing assistance to sponsors that are not just limited to highways. We'll utilize consultant services to offer complete streets and other best practices training. We'll temporarily offer consultant services to fill sponsor gaps due to staff vacancies on request to keep projects moving. And then we'll also contract with consultants to obtain grant funds to help sponsors better leverage Measure A and W funds. This slide addresses the project selection process for the comparable Measure A and W programs and the Measure W Regional Transit Connections category. For the Measure A Highway program, we're proposing to continue with our competitive funding calls, focusing on making funding awards for the Measure A highway pipeline projects with a small funding set aside to start initial planning and environmental work on new projects. The highway pipeline projects are those which the TA previously funded prior to the start of the last highway call for projects. The reasons why we are focusing on the pipeline projects is that there is a need to complete work already started. For the Measure W highway program, we're proposing to update the existing short-range highway plan and prepare an accompanying capital improvement program to get a better sense of current highway project needs and to better inform the project selection process moving forward. We're also creating a separate subcategory in the Measure W highway program for transportation demand management to promote activities such as carpooling and the use of express buses on the highway system. The Measure A Local Streets and Transportation Program and the Measure W Local Investment Share funds are not competitive, and funding is distributed directly to our sponsors for their use on transportation projects at their discretion, with one caveat. For the Measure W Local Investment Share, if the pavement on the sponsor's roads isn't in good condition, then the funds must be used for pavement rehab. For the Measure A grade separation program, we're proposing to continue focusing on the Measure A grade separation pipeline projects on an as-needed basis, with a small set-aside to start work on new projects. Only 2.5% of Measure W goes to grade separations. We're proposing maximum flexibility for this use, the funds can be used to fund the Measure A grade separation pipeline projects or to start new projects through a call for projects process after Caltrain completes a planned grade separation priority study. There will be a lot more money for pedestrian and bicycle projects with the inclusion of Measure W funding. The Measure W bicycle and pedestrian program is also more flexible in that the use of the funds aren't limited to capital projects. We're proposing to continue with our established call for projects process for capital projects, but we will have separate subcategories for large and small projects. We're also proposing to create a new subcategory for city and area-wide bicycle and pedestrian master plans and the promotion and encouragement of bicycling and walking with Measure W funds. We're also proposing to create a separate Safe Routes to School subcategory to encourage bicycling and walking to public schools with Measure W funding that will be coordinated with the County Office of Education's Safe Routes to School grant program. For the Measure W Regional Transit Connections category, there will be a variety of different competing transit modes, including commuter and heavy rail, express buses, and ferries. And we're proposing to prepare a regional transit connections plan with an accompanying capital improvement program to better inform the selection process. Our sponsors are the agencies that submit applications for funding and are historically involved with the delivery of projects. As you can see on the Measure A side, there's really no changes proposed except for what's highlighted in yellow, which is that the TA will now be a sponsor for highway projects of regional significance. On the Measure W side, unlike Measure A, where the project sponsors are specifically called out in the Transportation Expenditure Plan, Measure W says that the project sponsors are to be determined through the strategic planning process. And as such, in the yellow highlighted portion of this slide here, you can see the list of eligible project sponsors that have been proposed. They basically are very similar to what's on the Measure A side, since we have a lot of these different comparable programs. However, there's a few additions that have been made. The new Express Lane JPA agency for the highway program and Commute.org, which will also be involved in the transportation management subcategory of highways. And then on the pedestrian and bicycle program, the additions that are different from the Measure A side are that CCAG, transit agencies, and public schools, as well as Commute.org, will also be an eligible sponsor for the Measure W side. And then on the regional transit connections category, transit agencies such as JPB, Samtrans, BART, as well as WETA or the host city will be eligible applicants for ferry projects. So now I'd like to speak a little bit about the Measure W core principles. As you can see from this slide here, we have a variety of different principles that speak to modern transportation concepts ranging from relieving traffic congestion countywide to enhancing safety and public health, as well as facilitating the reduction of vehicle miles traveled, travel times, and greenhouse gas emissions. So as part of the strategic plan process, we were supposed to determine the applicability of the Measure W core principles to the individual Measure W program categories. When we started off with this process, we didn't know if all the principles would be applicable to all the categories and to what extent they may apply if they did. So this slide shows the principal weightings in relation to all the different program categories together. As you can see, there's a fair range of weightings among the principles, and we basically got this input through a variety of different sources, from the SAG and TAG surveys, the general public survey that Jessica mentioned. We took into account language specifically written in the measure, and as well as input from staff and our consultants. So what you see here is that it turned out that all the principles, to some extent, were applicable to all the programs. However, their applicability varied, as you can see here, by the differentiation in individual weightings. One thing I would like to point out, and it's separated off to the side, is the local investment share. The information on the local investment share with regard to the weightings is basically for advisory purposes, as this funding is to be used at the discretion of the local sponsors. However, we will be providing information pertaining to these weightings from people that actually work or live in the individual cities, and this can be shared with the respective governing bodies to take into account in how they use these funds. These principles, by the way, are subject to change, as this is the information that was originally taken. It's in our current draft plan, and we're currently getting additional feedback. Okay, so now we move on to the valuation criteria. So basically, we started out working with our SAG and TAG, and we initially gave some existing evaluation criteria that were relevant to the various programs that we use on the Measure A side. Staff and consultants also came up with some additional suggestions, and then the SAG and TAG literally came up with hundreds of different criteria, which was great. We subsequently worked with the SAG and TAG to narrow down all this criteria into a more workable, manageable form. And in fact, in one of the SAG and TAG meeting sessions, we actually had facilitated breakout groups. And we use the SAG and TAG to actually tell us which criteria were the most important to them, so we could narrow down the criteria into groups of relatively 20 to 25 different criteria for each program. This is a snapshot of a portion of the draft evaluation criteria developed for the highway program in relation to each of the Measure W core principles as shown in the draft plan, which is subject to further refinement during the public comment period. The valuation criteria are used to assess the merits of projects submitted as part of funding requests. Funding recommendations for our competitive funding calls are based on how well projects meet our established evaluation criteria. The highest ranked projects are the ones that best meet the established evaluation criteria. As you can see from this slide, examples of a few of the illustrated criteria, in this case grouped under the thematic area of need, include the severity of current and projected congestion, the identified safety issue to be alleviated, which can be documented, for example, through crash history, and the demonstrated need to improve access and connections to jobs, housing, transit, and other high-activity centers. Our SAG and TAG helped develop the evaluation criteria relevant for each core principle. The core principles are listed at the top of this slide. High-weighted core principles are highlighted in orange and assigned a value of 3 points. Medium-weighted core principles are highlighted in green and assigned a value of 2 points. And low-weighted core principles are highlighted in blue and assigned a value of 1 point. For each evaluation criteria that is directly related to a core principle, a maximum point score has been assigned based on the weighting of that core principle. The maximum possible points a project may receive pertaining to a specific criteria have been tallied in the second to last column on the far right. For simplicity purposes, we have calibrated the maximum possible point scores proportionally for each evaluation criteria to a 100-point scale, as shown in the last column on the far right. So to provide an overall recap and next steps, we started this process back in March of 2019. The draft plan was released in October 15th. That started a 30-day comment period, which closes on November 15th, and we're taking the plan to our board for adoption on December 5th. And again, we encourage you to go read the draft plan. There's also a comment form on our website. The link is www.smcta.com/strategic plan.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Joel. Thank you, Jessica. Again, thank you to everybody who's watching this, who's tuning in either live or after the fact. Again, your feedback is incredibly important to us, and we really appreciate you, either filling out our comment form and just letting us know what you think. So again, if you have an official comment, please fill out that online comment form that's on the project website at smcta.com/strategic plan. Again, you can call our customer service at 1-800-660-4287, or you can also write us a letter, P.O. Box 3006 in San Carlos, California, 94070. And so we'll stick around for about 15 minutes or so. If you have more questions, we'll still be monitoring the chat live. So if you have any comments or sort of questions clarifying, go ahead and enter those in, and we'll answer them as best as we can. But we'll hang out. And again, thank you so much for attending.